When you wake up every day, it's an act of resilience because there's no guarantee. It's zero guarantee that you go to bed and the next day you'll be alive.
You just lost your loved one. Now what? Welcome to the Grief and Life podcast, where we explore this new reality through grief-colored lenses. Openly, authentically, I'm your host, Nina Rodriguez. Let's get started.
Hello, and welcome back to the Grief and Life podcast. My name is Nina, and I am your host. What happens when the work we do in the world meets what we are carrying within? Today, I'm joined by Carl Manlan, a development practitioner and bridge builder who has worked at the intersection of financial inclusion, human sustainability, and purpose-driven leadership. His career has spanned renowned global institutions and the private sector, connecting policy with lived, on-the-ground realities across emerging markets. But beyond the titles and institutions, Carl is deeply curious about what lives beneath the systems, the emotional lives we carry, the griefs that shape us, and the inner alignment required to lead, build, and belong in meaningful ways. And that curiosity has found expression in his new book. It's a newly released book of poems titled I Can Breathe, born from a deeply personal journey through grief and his search for inner light. He is also the co-host of Inside the Blueprint, a podcast that he co-creates with his daughter, Claire, where intergenerational leadership and well-being comes into focus. Let's get into this conversation, Carl. Welcome to the Grief and Life podcast.
Thank you, Nina. It's a beautiful introduction.
Well, it's an absolute honor to have you, and your resume is very impressive, both your lived experience and your professional experience. But before we delve into any of that, I would love to ask you, how do you define grief, and what is your relationship with it? And just start wherever you'd like.
I define grief as an experience. Last 2 years ago, there's a very good friend of mine who lost a father. And as we were talking, I said to her, the feeling that you know now are new to you. She paused and she said, yes. So it's an experience. You don't really know when it will hit you, but when it does, you acknowledge that this is something completely different. It hurts, of course, because the grieving part is very much connecting to all our senses. You know, the touch, the smell, the seeing, and being able to have someone if it's someone that you lost, or something if it's something that you lost. And it can be, we grieve many things. So to me, that experience is something that I came across it first time when I lost my grandfather. And it was a very new experience for me because when I was that age, 10, my grandfather was my God. You know, he represented all these things to me. And it was a very interesting moment where I felt that sometime in life we have this moment of giving and taking. And he was buried on the day of my first communion. You know, so you have this 10-year-old who's walking into church with this beautiful hymn on this blessed day that God has given us. And I'm questioning my own faith. I'm questioning what it means to be in that situation. So grief to me is an experience. And of course, when I was 10, I wouldn't have been able to express it this way. But no, I had different experiences that made me realize that grief is the other side of love. You know, you only grieve what you love. You can't just grieve for the sake. No, you have to have loved that thing, that person, whatever it is, for you to be able to grieve. So that's what it is to me.
That's a beautiful explanation. I love the concept of it as an experience. And it sounds like it's an experience to be carried and integrated into your life. And I know that your poems are dedicated to grief and life in general. So how did that come about? What was it within you that felt like your grief needed expression in this form?
So I always wanted to give my children an opportunity to understand who the grandparents were, because they passed away before they could really understand what it means to actually have a grandparent. And I started with a memoir. That was the original idea. And then last year, I went to San Miguel de Allende at the Writers' Conference. And my first workshop was on grief. And I had around the table about 15 or so people. And there was this man that I always remember his story, because that's a moment where I really felt that this is an experience that we all share. So this man says, every time I introduce myself, I'm in a dilemma. Because when I say that I have 3 daughters, people are looking for the third one. When I say that I have 2 daughters, I feel that I betray the memory of my daughter. And I was like, it is such a difficult thing. And I don't know what it feels to be a father who buries his child. I don't know what it is. So it's another form of grief that I am grateful that I've not experienced it. And I pray that I don't have to experience it. But that moment, listening to this father, I felt that I had to now write in a different format. And that's how I started writing. So basically, the book was in me in a different form or format. And from that conversation, I started writing the next day. And I basically said to Judith Hill, who was giving the workshop, when I land in Dubai next week, Tuesday, I'll send you whatever I have. That's how the book was born.
That's amazing. And for those who may not know, San Miguel de Allende is in Mexico. So you went to this writer's workshop in Mexico, and it almost feels serendipitous that you met this man who shared this incredible story of his truth about his daughters, earth side and heaven side, and how he loves them all equally. And that changed the course of your book. So I love these points of connection that,
Right.
like you said, alter our initial intention. And I love asking authors where they started, because like 9 out of 10 times, whatever one set out to write turns out to be completely different than what
Absolutely.
actually came out. So I absolutely love that. And I'm so curious if we could preface the rest of the conversation, if you would be open to reading Tango from your book. Would that be okay?
Okay.
And the reason for that is that one stands out to me because I always say grief is not this or that, it's this and that. And I feel like Tango embodies that that wisdom.
Yeah. Okay. Tango, life and death, death and joy, joy and grief, grief and peace, peace and love, love and life intertwine. Each tango, life, death, and I tangled. In San Miguel de Allende, and spoken words found attentive souls. Untold stories found listening souls. Our lived life, our coming death, found thirsty souls. Our grief united us, writing at last, silence long kept loud inside. Finding our shared humanity, now knowing all along we were together. Complete stranger, bound by grief, bound by distance, a surprise shock of unity. No one is alone in grief. To tango with grief is to be whole in transition. Grief is passion.
For our audience, you could probably see why I connected with that one so much. I love it. Thank you so much. And in your own words, what was the inspiration behind that? I mean, beyond the
But
obvious
it
of the words.
was that meeting. It was listening to all these strangers that decided to go to San Miguel de Allende, selected this workshop randomly, not randomly, intentionally or not, and find all of us expressing grief differently, but that was unity. It was unity around something that we all carry, we all brought to San Miguel de Allende, and we're willing and able to share it in a way that resonated with the others. I mean, the other stories, of course, were as powerful, but it's the story of that man and me watching someone who has been suffering in silence or been suffering united with all of us. And, we often speak about how love unites because we have this very sort of joyful experience of what love is. But I found over time that there's also joy in grief. It's sort of counterintuitive, but there is joy in grief because the reason why we grieve is because we have those so powerful memories of what that love was, that we then have this moment where we just smile at the idea of what it was. But of course, our senses remind us that we will never live that experience again. And I think that's where the sort of the difficulty, the challenge comes. But once you overcome that and you accept that it was a gift, being for a day, for a week, for many years, it was a gift. And we have to embrace those gifts for what they are. They are temporary in nature. And to me, that became a very powerful element around breathing. And I think, if you think about the title of a book, I chose I Can Breathe because whoever reads the title is talking, he or she is talking to herself or himself. I don't say you can breathe, it's I. And it's such a powerful thing to realize that as long as you're breathing, there's an opportunity for you to exist and to do something different, to contribute, to love, but also to accept that because you are able to love, you are also able to grieve.
Stated so beautifully and absolutely. And even for those of us who have experienced personal losses, we take breathing for granted when things are normal and it's not something you think about. But when you lose a loved one, even breathing becomes something we have to consciously work at.
Yes.
You know, it feels like the world ran out of air. So being able to transmute these experiences and be an active participant in your life with time and with care and by leaning into the grief, it makes a big difference. And your book, as we've already heard a bit, plays with the delicate balance between loss and renewal and finding beauty in the most challenging of human experiences and even finding prosperity that blooms from the ashes of grief. So you touched on that, but can we go a little bit deeper? What does that mean to you and why was that important to talk about what comes out of grief?
So I was 22 when my sister calls me and she says, Daddy was not at the office. And it's strange because my father never missed a day in the office. And a few hours later, she calls me and she says, we found the body, or they found the body. And of course, it was a painful, difficult moment. But I had this moment where I said to myself, I have to continue where he left off. I didn't know what it meant, but it was that moment where I was like, you know what? It feels that he didn't finish what he started. And I want to start where he left off. And fast forward 3-4 years later, a friend of his offers me an internship. And I literally started where he left off. I studied finance and economics, and I ended up working in health. And the first 10 years of my career were in health. Then the following 10 years were in financial services. And my mother's dream was for me to become a banker. And I started working in financial services a couple of months after she passed away. And in my last interview, or my second last interview, was a week after I buried her. So to me, looking back at these experiences, I was like, you know what? I lived the experiences that they had wanted me to live. So I carried forward the things that they had dreamt about. Not necessarily intentionally, but that's how life turned out to be. So sometime last year, I was terminated. And when that happened, it almost as if I was coming towards the end of a cycle. And the day it happened, the person who wrote the forward sent it to me on that day. So the day in the book, if you look at the date of the forward, that's the day I was terminated. So when that happened, I was like, you know what? I have to finish this book. So when I woke up the next day, I just plowed into it and just finalized it. And then it was out in November. And then now I'm working in a complete different field, which is not related to what my parents were doing. So that's what it means. Like you have to get to a place in life where you accept those challenges that come your way. You accept those things that you don't necessarily understand why they happen, how they happen. But you read the signs in a way that you accept that, you know what, this has ended. But this friend of mine sitting in Argentina had no idea. But for some reason, she sends it to me on that day. And that's what really, to me, this means. It's like you need to really appreciate that life has these challenges that are thrown at you. And if you take them with a sort of light heart, you take them with the fact that actually there's another door. You haven't seen it yet, but you have to trust that that door was waiting for you to enter, but you had to be pushed out because you're probably taking too long to get out for you to be able to enter. So that's, to me, is a power that grief allows you to see, to experience. Because I accepted that it's part of a journey, that I will be grieving, but I cannot stop at grief because I'm still breathing. You know, and that is, to me, the most powerful force that we have. And sometimes we say things like, when we have a cold, we often say, my nose is blocked, or I can't breathe. But it's the same thing. Yeah, it's just that these are temporary. So you have a solution. You get a nasal drop, or you put steam, whatever it is. So you find a solution, and you unblock your nose, and you carry on so that you can continue breathing. So we have these small reminders of life that, your breath can stop. This afternoon, I was at the office, and my wife calls me, and we have the coach of a basketball where my son plays that just passed away. He had a heart attack. And, you sort of look at, he's young, athletic. There were no signs per se, but he just passed away. And she sent me a message later to say that our son was in tears. So he's experiencing grief in a way that he understands what you mean, but he's grieving because that person meant something to him. And our role as parents is to help him understand that, yes, these are emotions that you have to express. And you have to learn from these things that, that's life is preparing for you for something. And you sort of have to make sure that we speak about these emotions, because that's often the challenge, that in many families, we only speak about certain things. We don't speak about grief. We don't speak about money. We don't speak about sometimes violence that exists in the family. And we carry on our lives with this burden of things that are never been spoken about, that are not being touched. But it's our responsibility as parents to ensure that our children experience the full range of emotions that they have access to.
Thank you very much for your openness, first of all. Second of all, I'm deeply sorry for your losses. I know that you've understood the role in the bigger picture and how life unfolds. And obviously, this book is a testament to that. And also, that 22-year-old version of you that got the news, I'm sure that part's somewhere in there hurts because
Still
probably
hurts.
all the hurts. Yeah. And the life that you maybe wish you would have had with your dad, like you said, it just ended so suddenly the same way that the basketball coach, I'm sorry about that loss too, um, it just ended. And I think that's what's so shocking about, particularly sudden losses. It's like, wow, that was the end of the life, and it puts things into such perspective. And it sounds like it's done that to you. And one thing that I want to highlight is, and our listeners by now can tell there's so much wisdom in your words and in your messaging. I took the time to listen to a lot of the videos that you've done, interviews, your TEDx talk, everything, your podcast. And what I perceive is this is a human with incredible groundedness, like grounded energy and a deeper understanding of life. And you've accomplished business wise and professionally some incredible achievements that some people could only dream of. If you're welcome to touch on those if you'd like. But what stood out to me is that it doesn't seem, let me choose my words carefully here. It doesn't seem like that is what defines your life. It seems like you are okay with whatever happens because you understand that Carl will be Carl no matter what. If that makes sense to you. So that's what
It
I picked
does.
up on, right? And a lot of it, I'm curious if it has to do with maybe some of this grief, or where did that understanding come from? Because it sounds like it's something you carried as a young person and throughout your life.
So I had very loving parents. I think that is the foundation of where I am. They taught me things that may appear simple, but that it was never about me. That I had to understand that my role was about helping the other person. So my father was a medical doctor and my mother was a nurse. And very early, I think my father realized that I would never become a doctor because it's one of these things where it took me to his practice. He was an internal medicine specialist. There was this tube going down someone's throat. I looked at this, I just couldn't stand it. But almost every day after school, I had to wait for them because there was always some patient that they had to take care of. So you grow up with this thing that, okay, so surely, yes, I'm important to them, but I'm not that important because they are committed to save someone's life. That's what the oath was. And then you sort of grow up with a sense that sometimes you're really not the priority because they'll forget me at school. And then they'll get home and then they realize, oh, he's not here. Well, and I'm still at school. So you grow up with this sense that we love you, you're important, but you're not the center of the world. That's one. Number two, a lot of my education was in public schools. So my parents were very conscious about the fact that I had to understand the society in which I was growing. And that privilege was access to education. That's it. And they're very, very clear with me that your only inheritance is your education. And this is probably why I don't stop studying, I don't stop learning, I don't stop learning. That's really the central piece of who I am. And whoever I've worked with before, I said to them, guys, I don't do titles. I don't do any of this stuff. And really, my time in this space is limited. I will do what I can while I'm here. And then, you know what? Next, something else will come. So a couple of days ago, a former colleague of mine sent me that message where she got the role that we've been working on for more than a year. But I mean, I left the organization and she got the role. She still remembered to reach out to tell me that she got the role. It was really a great moment of joy for me because the intentionality about your career, your life, is what makes a difference. And that really, that's what it is, that there are so many things that I just don't worry about. And my focus is how can I be of service? Because that's how I was raised. And that's what my parents left with me. So that's really what my interest is. Anything else? Not really.
Thank you for that. And thank you to your parents for their wisdom that they shared through their lived experience and how that was inherited, like you said, by you and the way in which you live your life. I'm smiling as I'm listening to you because just yesterday I was talking to my mom about how she feels about the loss of my brother. And, it was only the two of us. She
Mm,
lost my brother. And I said, you seem to be doing okay. And that's a broad statement, right? Because with all the nuance that grief has. And then she says, I just realized that my life is not about me and neither was his. And those were not her exact words. I'm paraphrasing here, but I hear a bit of an echo in what you just said about our lives. Yes, we are us and we have responsibility and we have our free will and choices and all the things. And also, there is so much of our lives that is about being of service to others, about being joyful, even though you work for something, somebody else gets it, or, the evolution is not necessarily how you envisioned it and how things play out and honoring that, meeting what is as it is. And that's just coming through so much here. And you talk about your early upbringing. There is, and your TED Talk, which I absolutely loved. I have a quote here. Let me find it. Your TEDx talk, it says, their creativity is their currency. And you were talking about the women that you saw essentially being entrepreneurs without the title, if you will, without the public
yep.
title. So could you
Yep.
just take us back to that version of you and how that shaped so much of how you see leadership and mentorship in your role today?
So growing up in Abidjan, these women would come and knock on the door and ask for empty bottles, plastic, glass. So fine, I mean, I would just sort of give and not really think about it. Then my mother will buy peanuts on the street. And those peanuts were in recycled bottles, either plastic, glass. And I started making a connection between these two. And I was like, huh. So the circular economy, the recycling, the making sure that you can do with what you have was already embedded in my everyday life, in things that were around me. And these very courageous women that find purpose into something that was discarded. So you fast forward and you say to this life which we live now, where marketing, I mean, companies, those big companies have found a way to make us believe that it's our responsibility to recycle the bottles that they've given us, that we paid for. And I found it amazing. It was a genius. The marketing person that came up with this was a genius. That you go to a store, you buy a bottle, and then you and your family will now have space in your house where you sort of put different items, and then you walk to the store to give it back for free, or maybe you get a few cents here and there. But these women were doing it already. And they were not there was no marketing plan. It's just that they realized that there's a business to be made. There's somebody who's selling peanuts. She can either put it in a small plastic or she can find a bottle, but she doesn't have access to the bottles. So this group of women decided, you know what? we're going to be part of his value chain. And we will supply the bottles that where the peanuts will go. So you can find peanuts in bottle of different beverages that exist, from alcoholic beverages to sort of sugar-based beverages. And to me, first growing up and looking at this, I never really connected those dots. And then as I sort of left the country and started thinking about what was it like growing up about entrepreneurship, as these women were ahead of the curve. And my then sort of like, what if we had given them the tools for that business to grow? Meaning maybe a van to be able to carry this thing easier. Because they will have these massive logs on their heads that they will just carry around. And you're like, there's so much potential and creativity on the continent. And people always have a solution to the problems. But the thing is, we often don't pay enough attention to those problems that they're solving. And we're trying to import solutions, we're trying to import things. And to me, that's another form of grieving. Because you look at a continent of 1.4 billion people that has a lot of resources and still can't figure out really how to make do with what we have. And we focus intently on what we want. But that sort of focus on the future deprives us of a present that we have in a way that really sometimes saddens me. Because if we're paying more attention to what we have and do with what we have, it's not that we'll be transforming the whole world, but people will probably be a little bit more happier. Now, with technology, it's harder to raise children nowadays with technology because my kids can compare themselves to anybody else around the world. And I remember we traveled and we found these teenagers similar age to my kids. They were trying to wear the same type of clothes. They were watching the same series. And I remember growing up, there was this series, I don't know if you watch it as well, called Scooby-Doo, with the dog. So I was growing up in Abidjan. My wife is from South Africa. We all watch the same cartoon. And that, if we were able to sort of share that experience back then when we didn't have the internet, now that we have it, imagine what it could be if we pay a little more attention to what exists around us, what we have around us, and how do we sort of transform the lives that are around us without really focusing too much on this future that we may never see.
Wise words once again. And to be clear for our listeners, for context, we're talking about the continent of Africa specifically. A lot of our listeners actually don't know this, but I used to work in a political think tank focused on Western Hemisphere affairs, but still it gives you a global context of how things are intertwined among, different countries. And one thing that was very clear is that even this is like more than 10 years ago, but even then, there was a lot of eyes on the continent of Africa and the different countries within Africa, because there is, like you said, so much potential and there's so much ingenuity and resilience and creativity. And you talk a lot about these themes throughout your speeches. And also, it sounds like it's played a role in how you showed up as a leader in different countries. So your understanding global, also lived experience from your youth to your education. It's just all tied together. So, what is the role of resilience and leadership? And what role has that played throughout your life? Maybe even weave in grief if that's relevant.
I was born premature. I tend to think that the resilience was already there from the start. You sort of fight for something that you don't even understand, but you are told later that when you were born, both your mother and yourself had a hard time actually breathing and staying alive. Okay, so that's step number one that you don't even know, but you already started fighting for this. And then I remember one of my aunts used to always laugh at me because I spoke very late compared to other children. So I think this was probably a gift, because if you can't really express yourself, you have to listen. You have to sort of absorb more than the others, because the words just don't come naturally. And then one of the things probably that allowed me to be probably a little bit more grounded was the fact that I really, really disliked reading. My parents tried everything. And then one day I said, it's okay. What I'm going to do, I'll read the dictionary because I don't want to read, but fine, I will read the dictionary. So the dictionary became my source of words and connecting with words. And I think that's probably one of my greatest source of resilience because I am very particular about the definition of a word. And often when I speak to people, I say, what is the etymology of this word? Because if you understand the etymology of a word, you will be careful how you use that word. For example, empower. It assumes that you do not have power, so somebody has to give it to you. But we are very happy talking about women's empowerment. So, other guys, just go back and look at the word. Or you talk about transmission. It became one of my favorite words because transmission means giving a mission. And when you're a parent, you want to give your children a mission as early as possible. And I had wished that my parents understood that and gave me that earlier because they left early. So my focus then becomes one where I don't know the day it will end, but I want to make sure that I have given as much as possible that I could before it happens. And someone told me a couple of days ago that actually this is a strong sign of trauma. That urgency of wanting to do things. And I when I said this to my wife, she's okay, so what are you going to do about it now? Because I have this sense of urgency and I can understand where it's coming from. And it's something that I'm trying to work on and sort of know what you probably have to slow down and sort of just do. So the resilience piece has different threads that have come through. But ultimately, when you wake up every day, it's an act of resilience because there's no guarantee. There is zero guarantee that you go to bed and the next day you'll be alive. And once you accept that, you say, you know what? Whatever I can do today, I'll try and do it to the best that I can. Because tomorrow, I have no guarantee that tomorrow may come. So we have to get to this place where we are comfortable about the idea that today might be the last day. And I reached a point in my life where I am comfortable with that idea. It's not that I want it to happen, but I'm comfortable with the idea. And I pray that when it happens, I would have done everything that I was supposed to do here in the time that I was given.
Just want to let that statement breathe a little because there was so much beauty and wisdom in your words right there. I really was receiving them. And it's so, so true. Even just waking up is an act of resilience. And thank you for sharing that through line of how it's played out in your life and in different ways. When you were talking about the origin of the words, it reminded me of your poem Peso. I'm curious if you would be
Ah,
open to reading that one.
yes, because actually
Putting
I
you on
went
the
to look.
spot here.
So yeah, it is. I will read it, and I know peso can mean different things, and you have the currency peso, and then it doesn't exist in many countries now. But Spain had the peso, and I think peso has an element as well of weight. So let me find it.
Just, peso in Spanish, and it means weight, or it could be dollar. It could
Correct.
mean different things. And I just love the way you played with the words in this one.
Okay, so here we go. Peso. I do not have to carry the peso of tomorrow. You have to be with me in the moment of our today. I do not have to lift the burden of tomorrow. You have to be with us in the past of our today. I go with you together, knowing tomorrow never comes, as tomorrow is a place where only today matters. I completely forgotten about it, but
It's
it
so
really
beautiful.
it
It
fits
goes,
with what
right?
we just spoke about. Yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
yes, it reminded me of that. It's beautiful. Thank you so much. And, another one I liked, w if you don't one more and that's it. I'm not gonna have you read
No problem, no problem. I'm happy to read them.
time. Is, baobab, please.
Ah, baobab. So baobab is a tree that is very, very strong and mighty. So here we go. Grief is a seed, prosperity a baobab, a woman standing strong and free. Standing on the shores of Côte d'Ivoire, I remember the sweetness of a pineapple, the bitterness of a student life. I remember the rich cocoa farms, blossoming with the labor of love, rooted in the bitterness of cocoa prices, the sweetness of a transformation, a promise rooted in the past, sorrow woven in the fabric of old despair. Scent of growth beyond compare is approaching. Standing on the shores of South Africa, I remember the sweetness of a watermelon, the bitterness of a student life. I remember the rich vineyards, blossoming with the labor of love, rooted in the bitterness of history, the sweetness of a transformation, a promise rooted in the past, sorrow woven in the fabric of old despair, scent of rainbow beyond compare is approaching. Standing on the Ethiopian highlands, I remember the sweetness of a history, the bitterness of a whispered cloud, echoing the drought that scared the world. I remember the rivers where new life was fed, blossoming with the boldness of vibrant fabrics, rooted in the bitterness of coffee, the sweetness of the aroma, as history reminds us seeds of hardship, roots belonging sprout new hopes. Standing on the shores of Togo, I remember the sweetness of the nana beans, the bitterness of a generation who failed their mothers. I remember the beating heart of trade in West Africa, where trade routes winding through villages ease pain through the divine work only women can be trusted with. Rooted in the bitterness of grief, the sweetness of struggles etched in lines so deep. For children to keep the promise of a grand design, beyond compare, imagined by the Nana Bens. Grief, the seed buried deep within, stands at the root of a baobab, where new hopes begin. Prosperity, a woman, a grace.
Thank you so much, and I know I put
You're
you on the
welcome.
spot there, but I really, really like that, and, um, there's so much there. There's so much there in that poem about
There's a
the
lot.
sweetness. Yes, the
There's a lot.
sweetness, the bitterness, the past, the bitter and the bittersweet past of the
Yeah.
history, and the hope, the seed of hope mixed in with the grief. There is so much there if you care to share beyond the words
So,
we just.
yeah, I mean, the Côte d'Ivoire is where I was born. And I left on the 25th of January, 1998. I can never forget the date. And I have not lived in Côte d'Ivoire since then. So I've been a migrant for more than, I mean, I crossed the page where it's half of my life has been now outside. So I've been a migrant all this time. So a student for work and so on. So I think about that time where growing up, cocoa prices, farmers, and here's me today working in agriculture. And that challenge of a country built on cocoa, but you still have that bitterness of a cocoa, if you ever tasted the fruit, which is not. And then the things that could have happened that for some reason were not able to be done. And then being a student I was a student, my first year of university was in Abidjan. It was a difficult year because students and teachers and civil society were always at odds with the government, and there was a lot of strikes. And I moved to South Africa. There was Zimbabwe in between, then I moved to South Africa. And as I was a student again in South Africa. So I restarted university 3 years after I finished high school. And back then, of course, to me, it was okay, all my peers, I think most of them, were finishing university. And I was just starting. So you have this moment where you ask yourself, will I make it? Because people are finishing, they are starting, and you are at ground zero. I look back and I was like, you know what? Everybody has their own pace. You don't have to compare yourself to anybody. But of course, back then, you look at this and you're like, okay, let's start. And then Ethiopia, I lived there about actually 11 years ago. And maybe more, a little bit more. And I was fascinated by this country. It was the first time that I was living there, but I was fascinated by the country, by what it was able to do, and getting into a different culture. And they have, of course, this experience with coffee is a big part of the culture. So I come from a place where cocoa and coffee are a big part of export culture. It's not something that you experience where people come around and drink coffee, and not the same way they do in Ethiopia. But it also has that very difficult history of where I grew up with that song, We Are the World. And I get to others and I'm looking around and like, okay, clearly they learned from that lesson so that it will never happen again. So you see a sense of possibility, a sense of it's possible to have Africans taking charge and ownership and agency about that transformation. And in Togo, the Nana Bens, to me, were probably, again, fascinating women. The nickname Nana Benz came from the fact that they were so wealthy that they were only driving Mercedes Benz. That's how they got the nickname of Nana Benz. And they really dominated in the 70s, the trade. And I remember living in Togo and looking at the legacy of these women. I was just in awe of what was possible in a country that has only 8 million people. But really, these women saw an opportunity and really delivered on that promise. So another sign of possibility. So I look at all these experiences, and really the baobab is the best expression of what the best visual expression of what this represents. And it's a seed, but but a seed has to germinate. A seed needs to be nurtured, and sometimes conditions might be hurried, difficult. But the baobab is still standing strong, tall, majestic. And that's really how all these experiences remind me of the fact that we are such a small piece of something which is so much bigger than us. And that's really the story behind this poem and the role that women have played in my life. My mother was very instrumental, same as my grandmother, who's not present at all in this book. And it's by design, because I think she deserves her own space because of what she represents to me. And I remember once I carried holy water from Lourdes in France, all the way back to Abidjan. And when I gave her that bottle, that joy was really, really indescribable. To see my grandmother that happy for water from Lourdes, because she really was praying the Virgin Mary constantly. And she never made it to Lourdes. And I remember traveling then, and I know what, I wasn't living in France, but I was like, you know what, I'm going to carry this water to where I'm going, and then I'll make sure that I get that water all the way to Abidjan. And I gave it to her. And that's, for me, it was one of these moments where you realize that it doesn't take a lot. It's just the intentionality of being of service that needs to always, always take precedence.
We're thankful to her and everything that she continues to bring in through the world through you. I'd like to give you the opportunity to share her name as well as your father and your mother, if that would be something that you would like to include
Yeah.
in the conversation. And if not, that's okay.
So my grandmother was named Asiaye Marie Madeleine. So in Agny, which is an ethnic group where I'm from, her first names means the the earth has ended, because she was the last born of her family. So that was a name that my younger sister actually carries. And then my father name was Cassie. First name was Cassie. And then my mother's first name was Afala. I don't remember the meaning of the name, actually. Maybe she never told me, or maybe she told me I forgot. So these are, and then my grandfather, who features in the book, his name was Cablan, and I don't remember what it means. And that's only from my mother's side. From my father's side, I never met my paternal grandmother, and I met a few times my paternal grandfather, but not really connected as I had from my maternal side. But all these individuals really shaped the person that I am today in many different ways. And I'm grateful to them, because they were loving individuals. And I think that is something which is key. You have to have experienced love in its purest, simplest form for you to understand what it is when you lose it. I'm not saying that everything was perfect, not at all. But the intentionality of making sure that I understood that I had them supporting me meant a lot. And I think when I was writing the dedication, I didn't want to sort of get the one which sort of, okay, to the usual. But really, what I envisaged was really, this collection is dedicated to those who carry the breath of good Samaritans who came before them so they could become. And I became, because of all these people.
Thank you for bringing them in the conversation with us. I believe this is how we get to honor and continue to honor them, by saying their name. Thank you. And I saw that in the opening of the book about the Good Samaritans and how you dedicate your poems to those good people in this world that shine a light for us through generations, really. So thank you for bringing them. And I cannot end this conversation without bringing your amazing daughter, Claire, into this conversation, and your son, Liam, as well. But in the minutes that we have, if you could touch on your podcast called Inside the Blueprint that you
Yeah,
do with your daughter, Claire. Tell us a little bit about that and where people could find some of your work.
I am incredibly grateful to be Claire's father, because for some reason, I have a responsibility to guide, nurture, and sort of allow this young individual to be the best she can be. And the podcast was born from observing her being a very creative and artistic person. And I was in a studio recording some short videos. And then she was sitting opposite me and she was busy giving me guidance on how I should enunciate, how I should smile. So I looked at her and said, you know what? Why don't we do a podcast together? So initially she said yes. And then she said, no, I'm not going to do it. And then I remember asking her brother, younger brother, why do you think she doesn't want to do it? And she said she's scared, but I'm sure she'll come around. I said, okay. And then it took a while, a few weeks. And then eventually, after asking a few times, and then she said, okay, yes, I'll do it. And it was born really out of the idea that we have to build those bridges in a way that they enter in their own way into a world that is welcoming them. Growing up, I don't know if it was the same for you, you have to be seen but not heard. Okay? Guests will come, you say hello, you greet, and then you just disappear. Not to be heard. As I used to ask my parents, because sometimes the teachers report will come and say, he doesn't really participate in class. I said, but much later, I said, but at home, you cannot speak to adults. You want me now in class to be speaking to adults. It's the same setup. So that ability to be able to communicate, to express yourself is something that we have to create a space. And that was my way of creating space for Claire and making sure that she feels comfortable to have conversation with adults. And that's how it was born. And I enjoyed this conversation because I discovered things about her that I didn't know. For example, that she likes interior design. I had no idea. And then we invited someone that actually does this kind of work. And it's really my way of making sure that I create space and agency for her. And then my son likes different things. He's a very different person. He's into his sports. He's into sort of very quiet moments. So with him, it's really quality time and presence that he prefers. So, you probably have it. It's a different way of being. So yeah, so you can find it on YouTube inside the Blueprint podcast. Also on my website, carlmanlan.com. But most importantly, to me, it's an invitation to every single father out there to really make time for the children. Because we don't raise children for ourselves. We raise them for the world. So you want to make sure that they get at home the space and the understanding that love is what that really would take them to places they never, ever imagined. And it's critical because I see a lot of young people that often do not have that environment at home. And they carry those with them, the same way we carry grief. But when you carry grief from a place where you couldn't find love at home, it's a very complex life that you're going to live. And I want to make sure that I can give to my children more love than I received from my parents. And it's not a criticism of my parents. They gave what they could. But I feel that I have to make sure that I am very intentional about how, what, and when this happens.
Something tells me you're doing just that and then some. And I have seen some of the videos with Claire, and she's a natural. She
Cheers.
commands at her age, her young age, she commands the microphone in the conversations, and she does a wonderful job interviewing as well. The production's amazing, and I love
Thank
that
you.
it's co-hosted with both of you and the way that you let her lead. It sounds like from this what I've gathered in this conversation about your grandmother and your mother, and that through line also lives in her. That's very evident. I'm sure Liam as well. and the way that you lived through Liam and your grandfather and your father. So it's just this beautiful continuity, the beautiful seed of grief and hope, the baobab. A side note on the baobab, I remember being a child learning about the baobab. And when I saw that tree, something in me woke up in my heart. And I said, that is the most beautiful tree I've ever seen in my life. And I've always had this affinity to it. I don't know what it is. I maybe we'll figure it out someday because there's just some beautiful affinity. So all that being said, thank you for the beauty of this conversation, how meaningful it is, your wisdom shared, your poem. It's funny you said earlier, for somebody who didn't like to read, you're now an author. Author. So see how life comes full circle. And
Yeah.
before we close out, I would just like to give you the floor to include anything that maybe you want to have included in this conversation. And if not, we will get ready to close.
Two things. First, thank you for what you're doing, because you could have chosen any other topic or any other focus, but you chose a focus that touches every single person in this world, regardless of gender, race. It touches all of us. And to give you opportunity to have a conversation about grief, which is not about tears, which is not about sadness, is a unique gift, especially that you mentioned your own loss. The second thing is everyone has a possibility to focus their energy on the other. And that's what I want my life to be. And that's what I try to do every single day. That the energy that I have has to be of service of something which is bigger, better than me. And that's really a gift that I have, that I received. And I feel that there's no other way to live my life than to be of service to others.
Oh, fully received. Thank you so much for everything you just said and for your words of wisdom and everything that continues to live through you and through your children and your work. Um, as a final closing thought, what would Carl today say to the version of Carl, that young 22-year-old who got the news of losing his father?
You honored them.
Thank you, Carl. It has been an absolute honor. Thank you for
Welcome.
all you do, and thank you for being you.
That's it for today's episode. Be sure to subscribe to the Grief and Light podcast. I'd also love to connect with you and hear your thoughts and your stories. Feel free to share them with me via my Instagram page at Grief and Light, or you can also visit griefandlight.com for more information and updates. Thank you so much for being here, for being you, and always remember, you are not alone.